The desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky that had forgotten what mercy looked like. 311 Navy SEALs, scattered across 17 cliques of hostile terrain, were about to learn what happened when perfect planning collided with perfect chaos. The operation had been textbook until it wasn't. Now they were pinned, ammunition running critical, and the closest reinforcement was 40 minutes out. 40 minutes they didn't have. The radio chatter had gone from confident to clipped to something that sounded almost like prayer. Somewhere in that desperate frequency, a call sign appeared that made the Joint Terminal Attack Controller freeze mid-sentence. Hailstorm. Nobody used that call sign anymore. The woman it belonged to had been grounded 18 months ago after an incident in the Hindu Kush that the brass preferred not to discuss. But here she was, pushing through contested airspace in an aircraft most fighter jocks considered a flying museum piece. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately called the Warthog, ugly as original sin and twice as unforgiving. Captain Alina Kessler banked hard over the ridge line, her eyes scanning the ground through the HUD with the kind of focus that only came from flying close air support missions nobody else wanted. The titanium bathtub surrounding her cockpit caught the late afternoon sun, turning her aircraft into a gleaming insect against the pale sky. Below, the terrain told a story written in muzzle flashes and dust clouds. The SEALs were surrounded in a dried riverbed, caught in a horseshoe ambush that was textbook insurgent warfare. Mortars walked toward their position with mechanical precision. Small arms fire created overlapping fields that made movement suicide. Hailstorm, Reaper 6 actual. The voice on the radio carried the kind of calm that came from accepting bad odds. We have 311 souls in a 600-meter perimeter, taking effective fire from north, east, and west ridgelines. Mortars zeroing our position. Medical evac is priority alpha, but we can't mark the LZ without getting shredded. Alina's thumb hovered over the weapon's release. Reaper 6 Hailstorm. Confirm you need a door kicked open, not a precision knock. There was a pause, then Hailstorm, we need you to make it rain. She'd heard the whispers in the ready room, seen the looks from pilots half her age who thought combat aviation peaked with afterburners and air-to-air missiles. They called the A-10 outdated, called close air support a relic of 20th century warfare. They called her grounded, broken, too cautious after what happened in Afghanistan. None of them understood that sometimes the mission wasn't about speed or stealth. Sometimes it was about flying low enough to see faces, slow enough to distinguish friend from foe, and carrying enough ordnance to rewrite the terms of engagement. The GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon in her nose carried 1,100 rounds of 30mm hate. Each round was the size of a milk bottle, designed to penetrate armor and dismantle fortified positions. The recoil was so powerful it actually slowed the aircraft when she fired. Alina had once described the sound to a reporter as God tearing a canvas. The reporter hadn't used the quote. She dropped to 300 feet, low enough that the insurgents on the ridgeline could probably see her helmet through the canopy. The A-10's engines, mounted high on the fuselage to reduce infrared signature and protect them from ground fire, screamed in protest as she pushed the throttle forward. The aircraft wasn't elegant. It didn't need to be. It was built around the gun, designed for one purpose, turning enemy positions into memories. Reaper 6, Hailstorm is rolling in hot from the south. Keep heads down for 20 seconds. The northern ridgeline erupted first. Alina's targeting pod painted the mortar positions with infrared designation while her eyes tracked movement patterns through the dust. She could see the insurgents scrambling, realizing too late that the ungainly aircraft bearing down on them wasn't just passing by. The GAU-8 spoke, and the world below transformed. Each burst was precise, measured, 3 seconds of controlled devastation that turned fortified positions into craters. The spent casings, each one tumbling through the air trailing smoke, fell like brass rain on the desert floor. Good hits, good hits. The JTAC's voice carried surprise and something else. Relief maybe, or respect. Northern Ridge is suppressed, Eastern Ridge still active with heavy weapons. Alina banked left, feeling the airframe shudder as she pulled 4GS in the turn. The A-10 could take punishment that would tear a fighter jet apart. She'd seen them land with half a wing missing, fly home with hydraulics shot to hell and one engine dead. The aircraft was tough because the missions were tougher. The Eastern Ridge was a different problem. Heavy weapons meant probable Zu-23 anti-aircraft positions, maybe even MA and PADS. The kind of threat that could swat an aircraft from the sky, if the pilot wasn't careful or lucky or both. She came in from an angle they wouldn't expect, using the terrain to mask her approach until the last possible second. The AGM-65 Maverick missiles under her wings weren't precision weapons in the surgical strike sense. They were hammer blows, designed to obliterate whatever they touched. She pickled off two in rapid succession, watching the smoke trails arc toward the heavy weapon positions. The explosions bloomed orange and black, secondary detonations, suggesting she'd hit something volatile. Eastern Ridge is compromised. We're getting movement. The JTAC's voice was steadier now. Hope was a dangerous thing in combat, but it was spreading through the radio frequency like wildfire. The Western Ridge was the smartest of the three. They'd held fire, waiting to see how she operated, looking for patterns. Alina appreciated the tactical patience even as she prepared to punish it. She came in with the sun behind her, the oldest trick in aviation warfare, and dumped a string of Mark 82 500-pound bombs that walked the ridgeline like a giant's footsteps. Each impact sent shockwaves rippling through the desert floor. The SEALs, pressed flat in whatever cover they could find, felt the percussion through the ground. Hailstorm Reaper 6. The ambush is breaking. Multiple insurgents retreating north into the Wadi system. Alina was already banking to follow. The A-10's loiter time was measured in hours, not minutes. She could stay over the battlefield maintaining presence, ensuring that anyone thinking about regrouping would reconsider. Below, the SEALs were beginning to move, establishing a secure perimeter, treating wounded, preparing for extraction. The medical evacuation helicopters were inbound now that the sky was no longer contested. Reaper 6. Hailstorm will maintain overwatch until your birds are wheels up. Copy that, Hailstorm, and ma'am. The JTAC's voice carried weight now, the kind that came from witnessing something that rewrote assumptions. Thank you doesn't cover it. Alina didn't respond immediately. She was watching a group of insurgents trying to regroup in a shallow depression 2 clicks north of the SEAL position. The targeting pod tracked them with infrared precision. One burst from the GAU-8 ended the discussion. The cannon's roar echoed across the valley, a reminder that the sky was no longer neutral territory. Just doing the job, Reaper 6, Hailstorm out. But it wasn't just the job, and they both knew it. 311 lives hung in the balance, and she tipped the scales. The flight back to base gave Alina time to think, which was both a blessing and a curse. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the familiar exhaustion that came from high-intensity combat flying. Her hands were steady on the stick muscle memory guiding the A-10 through the evening sky. The sun was setting behind her, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful, in the way that dangerous things often were. 18 months ago, she'd been flying a similar mission over the Hindu Kush. The mountains there were different from this desert, but the math was the same. Friendly forces in contact, enemy positions dug in, time running out. She'd made the call to engage despite marginal weather and questionable intelligence. The bombs had fallen true, the enemy position had been destroyed, and 43 Marines had lived to fight another day. But the after-action review had focused on the risks she'd taken, the protocols she'd bent, the decision-making that looked reckless through the lens of a conference room briefing. Aggressive to the point of dangerous, one colonel had written in her evaluation, lacks the judgment required for complex combat operations. They'd grounded her, shuffled her to a training squadron where she could teach but not fly combat missions, a gilded cage that felt like suffocation. She'd submitted request after request to return to operational duty, each one denied with bureaucratic efficiency. Until today. Until 311 SEALs needed someone willing to fly into hell and make the devil flinch. The radio crackled. Hailstorm approach control, you're cleared direct to initial. Winds 270 at 15 gusting 22. Runway 27, welcome home. Home. The word carried more weight than it should. The base appeared on the horizon, a collection of buildings and runways that represented both sanctuary and judgment. She dropped altitude, configured the A-10 for landing, and brought it down with the gentle precision that came from thousands of hours in the cockpit. The main gear kissed the runway with barely a squeak, the nose gear following a heartbeat later. She taxied to the parking area, shut down the engines, and sat in the sudden silence. The canopy opened to reveal her crew chief, Master Sergeant Torres, standing at attention beside the aircraft. Behind him, a crowd had gathered, unusual for a routine combat landing. Elena climbed down the ladder, her flight suit dark with sweat, her helmet marking a line across her forehead. Torres saluted with parade ground precision. "Ma'am, the operations officer wants to see you immediately." Of course he did. Elena had launched without explicit authorization, technically violating her grounded status. The fact that she'd saved 311 lives might not matter if the brass decided to make an example. She nodded, handed her helmet to Torres, and walked toward the operations building. The crowd parted, silent, watching. Some faces showed respect, others showed something harder to define. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb was waiting in his office, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He was old-school Air Force, a fighter pilot who transitioned to managing close air support operations because someone had to. He didn't believe in small talk. "Captain Kessler, you launched without authorization into a declared combat zone while under restricted flight status. You engaged targets with heavy ordnance in close proximity to friendly forces. You violated altitude restrictions and exceeded weapons release parameters." He paused, letting the charges hang in the air. "And you saved 311 men who would otherwise be counting body bags." Elena stood at attention, saying nothing. Webb walked to the window, staring out at the flight line where the A-10 sat cooling in the desert evening. "The SEAL commander just called me personally, used words like miraculous, precise, and save the task force. He wants to submit you for a distinguished flying cross." Webb turned back to face her. "I have a stack of paperwork here detailing why you should be court-martialed, and I have a phone call from a 3-star general asking why one of our most experienced close air support pilots was grounded in the first place." "Sir, I can explain." "I don't want explanations, Captain. I want to understand something." Webb's voice softened slightly. "Why did you launch? You had to know this could end your career." Elena met his eyes. "Because 311 men needed someone who knew how to fly close air support in a contested environment. And because I'm tired of being punished for doing the job right." Webb nodded slowly. "The job right, that's interesting phrasing. The after-action review from Afghanistan said you took unnecessary risks." "The Marines from Afghanistan would probably disagree, sir." "Yes, they would. I read their statements. All 43 of them wrote letters on your behalf." Webb returned to his desk, shuffling through papers. "Here's the situation, Captain. Your unauthorized flight today violated multiple regulations, but it also demonstrated exactly the kind of tactical judgment and combat skill that we're supposed to value in our pilots. The question is whether we punish you for breaking rules or reward you for saving lives. I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences. The paperwork is already being routed for your return to unrestricted flight status. The court-martial threat was hypothetical, and the Distinguished Flying Cross nomination is being endorsed by this command." Webb's expression finally cracked into something resembling a smile. "You're back on the flight roster, Captain. Try not to make me regret it." Elena felt the tension drain from her shoulders. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet. The SEAL Task Force has requested dedicated close air support for an operation next week. They specifically asked for you. 3 days later, Alina stood in the operations briefing room facing an audience that included some of the most experienced special operations personnel in the theater. The mission briefing was classified above her clearance level until 30 seconds ago. The maps on the wall showed terrain that made her previous missions look simple. Deep in enemy territory, multiple threat systems, limited escape routes. The kind of operation that appeared in classified after-action reports and sometimes in memorial services. The target is a high-value individual responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces, the briefing officer explained. Intelligence indicates he'll be at this compound for approximately 6 hours, 3 days from now. We'll insert 2 SEAL teams via helicopter under cover of darkness, conduct the raid, and extract before sunrise. The challenge is the response time of enemy reinforcements and the presence of air defense systems. Alina studied the map. You need close air support to suppress reinforcements and eliminate air defense threats without compromising the insertion. Correct, and we need a pilot who can operate in close proximity to our teams without friendly fire incidents, someone who knows how to distinguish targets in urban terrain at night. The briefing officer looked directly at her. The SEAL commander said you could see faces from 300 feet. We need that precision. The next 3 days were consumed by mission planning. Alina flew simulated runs in the training environment, memorizing landmarks and timing patterns. She coordinated with the SEAL teams, learning their movement patterns and communication protocols. She studied intelligence reports on enemy response times and weapon systems. By the night of the operation, she knew the terrain better than some of the streets in her hometown. The launch was scheduled for midnight. Alina pre-flighted the A-10 under the harsh glow of the flight line lights, checking every system with methodical precision. The aircraft was loaded with a mixed weapons package, AGM-65 Mavericks for hardened targets, Mark 82 bombs for area suppression, and a full load of 30mm ammunition for the GAU-8. The crew chief, Tors, watched her work with the careful attention of someone who understood that lives depended on maintenance. "She's ready, ma'am. Hydraulics are solid, engines are purring, and the gun is singing." Tors patted the aircraft's nose gear. "Bring her back safe." "Always do, Tors." The flight to the operational area was quiet, the kind of enforced radio silence that made every pilot hyper-aware of their breathing and heartbeat. Alina flew low, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection, navigating by landmarks she'd memorized during mission planning. The desert below was dark except for occasional lights marking villages and outposts. Somewhere ahead, 2 helicopters carrying SEAL teams were making their own approach, even lower and slower than she was. Hailstorm Reaper Actual. We're 10 minutes from insertion point, confirming you're in position for overwatch. Reaper Hailstorm. In position. No enemy air defense radar detected. Multiple ground vehicles moving on the northern approach road. Recommend you expedite insertion before they reach the compound. Copy that. Insertion in 5 minutes. Alina circled at 15,000 feet, high enough to avoid being heard from the ground, low enough to respond quickly. Through her targeting pod, she watched the compound with infrared clarity. Guards patrolling the perimeter, vehicles in the courtyard, heat signatures indicating multiple occupants in the main building. The helicopters came in fast and low, flaring hard to deposit the SEAL teams before lifting off and disappearing into the darkness. The operation was supposed to take 12 minutes from insertion to extraction, but combat operations rarely respected schedules. Hailstorm Reaper, we have the package moving to extraction point. Be advised, multiple vehicles approaching from the north. We need those stopped. Alina had already identified the convoy. 4 technical vehicles, probably mounting heavy machine guns, racing toward the compound. She dropped altitude aggressively, feeling the airframe shake as she dove. The vehicles were on a dirt road cutting through empty desert, perfect terrain for interdiction. She lined up the shot, accounting for their speed and direction, and triggered the GAU-8. The lead vehicle disintegrated, tumbling end over end in a spectacular fireball. The other three vehicles scattered, their drivers suddenly realizing they'd entered a kill zone. Alina came around for a second pass, walking 30mm fire across the road. Two more vehicles exploded. The fourth tried to escape into the open desert, a futile gesture. She tracked it with deliberate patience and ended the pursuit with a short burst. Reaper, threats neutralized. Your route to extraction is clear. Hailstorm, we've got a problem. Air defense system just went active. They've got us locked. The radar warning receiver in Alina's cockpit confirmed it. A SA-22 system, mobile and lethal, designed specifically to kill aircraft like hers. The threat warning tone filled her headset, urgent and insistent. The SEALs were exposed on the ground, the helicopters were inbound for extraction, and an air defense system was about to turn the night deadly. Alina didn't hesitate. She armed a Maverick missile, designated the radar emission source, and fired. The missile guided true, following the electromagnetic signature like a bloodhound. The air defense system had time to launch one missile before it died, a streak of light rising from the desert floor. Alina dumped chaff and flares, banking hard, feeling the G-forces compress her into the seat. The enemy missile, confused by the countermeasures, detonated harmlessly 200 feet to her left. Reaper, air defense is down. Get your birds in and get your people out. The extraction was textbook after that. The helicopters swooped in, loaded the SEAL teams and the high-value target, and disappeared into the night. Alina maintained overwatch until they were clear of enemy territory, only then turning back toward base. Her hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline and exhaustion mixing in her bloodstream. The debrief took 3 hours. The SEAL commander, a weathered captain who looked like he'd been carved from granite, shook her hand with genuine warmth. You kept us alive twice now, Captain. That's the kind of debt that doesn't get repaid with words. Just the job, sir. That's what you keep saying, but we both know it's more than that. He gestured to the maps covering the briefing room walls. The job is following orders and executing mission parameters. What you do is understand the intent behind the mission and find ways to accomplish it even when everything goes sideways. That's art, not science. Alina wasn't sure how to respond. She'd spent 18 months being told her decision-making was flawed, her risk assessment inadequate, her judgment questionable. Now she was being praised for the same instincts that had gotten her grounded. The SEAL commander seemed to read her thoughts. I heard about Afghanistan. Read the after-action review. You want to know what I think. Sorry. I think you scared some people who are used to making decisions from comfortable chairs. They saw someone willing to take responsibility for life and death calls in real time, and it made them uncomfortable, because it highlighted that most of them wouldn't have the courage to make those calls themselves. That's generous, sir. That's truthful, Captain. There's a difference between recklessness and calculated aggression. You understand that difference. Most pilots don't. He pulled a small object from his pocket. The team wanted you to have this. It was a challenge coin, custom-made. One side showed a warthog and a SEAL trident crossed. The other side was engraved, Hailstorm when hell needs a weatherman. 3 weeks later, Alina found herself back in the operations building, facing Lieutenant Colonel Webb again. His expression was different this time, less guarded, more conspiratorial. Captain, how would you feel about training a new generation of close air support pilots? Sir, I'm not sure I'm the right person to. Let me rephrase. How would you feel about training them the right way? Teaching them that precision isn't just about technology, it's about understanding the ground commander's intent. That aggression isn't recklessness when it's backed by skill and judgment. Alina considered, are you offering me a training command? I'm offering you the Close Air Support Weapons School instructor position. You'd be teaching the pilots who will fly these missions for the next decade. shaping doctrine, proving that experience and judgment matter more than youth and speed. It was the kind of offer that changed careers. Yes, sir, I'd be honored. Webb nodded. Good, because the Air Force is realizing something important. We spent 20 years training for air superiority fights that never happened while neglecting the close air support mission that saves lives every day. We need instructors who understand that the real measure of success isn't kills or medals, it's bringing everyone home. The weapons school training began 3 months later. Elena found herself standing in front of 20 pilots, most of them younger than her, all of them thinking they knew what close air support meant. She started the first class with a question. What's the difference between close air support and interdiction? Hands went up. Textbook answers about distance from friendly forces, command and control relationships, ordnance types. All correct, all missing the point. Those are the doctrinal answers, Alina said. Here's the real answer. In interdiction, you're killing things that might threaten your people. In close air support, you're saving people who are being threatened right now. The mission isn't destroying targets, it's preserving lives. If you don't understand that distinction, you'll make technically correct decisions that get people killed. The classroom was silent. One pilot, a captain with fighter experience, raised his hand. Captain Kessler, isn't that just semantics? Let me tell you about semantics. Alina pulled up a photo on the briefing screen. 311 Navy SEALs taken after the ambush in the desert. These men were surrounded, out of ammunition, taking casualties. The textbook answer was to wait for more assets, establish proper command and control, build a detailed air tasking order. The real answer was to fly into a contested environment and make it uncontested. Semantics means there in this photo instead of flag-draped coffins. The fighter pilot nodded slowly, understanding dawning. Over the next 6 months, Alina rebuilt the close air support training curriculum from the ground up. She taught her students to read the ground like a language, to understand the difference between suppression and destruction, to communicate with terminal attack controllers in the shared vocabulary of desperate circumstances. She took them flying in the A-10, letting them feel the aircraft's peculiar combination of toughness and precision. The Warthog is ugly, she told them during one flight. It's slow. Modern fighters can outrun, outclimb, and outmaneuver it without breaking a sweat, but none of that matters when you're flying close air support. What matters is that you can see what you're shooting at, that you can loiter over the battlefield for hours instead of minutes, that you can take damage and keep flying, that your gun fires depleted uranium rounds at 4,000 rounds per minute. Speed is irrelevant when the mission is precision. One of her students, a young lieutenant named Sarah Park, who'd come from a fighter background, struggled with the transition. She was used to thinking in terms of energy management and beyond visual range engagement. Close air support required a different mindset. I don't understand how you make decisions so fast, Park admitted after a particularly complex training scenario. You're processing friendly positions, enemy threats, weather, ordnance effects, collateral damage concerns, all simultaneously. Alina smiled. You're thinking about it as separate problems. It's not. It's one problem with multiple dimensions. The question isn't what should I do about the enemy position, and separately, where are my friendlies? The question is, what's the minimum violence necessary to achieve the ground commander's intent without risking friendly forces? Once you frame it that way, the decision tree simplifies. Park practiced that mental framework for weeks, flying simulation after simulation. Slowly, she began to internalize the rhythm of close air support, the way you had to think 3 steps ahead while staying completely present in the current moment. The balance between aggression and caution. The understanding that sometimes the best weapons release was no weapons release at all. The breakthrough came during a night training mission. Park was supporting a simulated special operations insertion, similar to the SEAL mission Alina had flown. When enemy reinforcements appeared on the scenario timeline, Park didn't immediately engage. She repositioned, used terrain to mask her approach, and waited until the reinforcements were isolated from civilian areas before striking. Clean, precise, effective. "That's it," Alina said over the training frequency. "You're not hunting targets anymore. You're solving problems. Big difference." The weapons school graduation was attended by senior leadership from across the Air Force. The commandant of the weapons school gave a speech about the importance of tactical excellence and operational innovation. But the moment that resonated most came when the SEAL commander who'd called in Hailstorm during the ambush appeared as a guest speaker. "I'm not a pilot," he told the graduating class. "I don't understand the technical details of your job, but I understand what it means to be on the ground, taking fire, watching ammunition counts drop, and hearing an aircraft overhead that's flown into hell specifically to pull you out. I understand what it means to trust your life to someone's judgment and skill. These instructors have taught you how to be worthy of that trust. Don't waste the lesson." Alina watched her students receive their graduating patches and certificates. 20 pilots who would go on to fly combat missions, train others, shape doctrine. 20 pilots who understood that close air support wasn't about the aircraft or the weapons. It was about the sacred responsibility of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. After the ceremony, Webb pulled her aside. "The Chief of Staff's office called. They want to feature the close air support mission in the Air Force's Strategic Vision document. They asked for a quote from you." "What did you tell them?" "I told them you'd probably say something that makes generals uncomfortable and enlisted troops cheer. Was I right?" Alina laughed. "Probably. What's the question?" "They want to know why the close air support mission matters in modern warfare." Alina thought about 311 SEALs in a desert ambush, about 43 Marines in the Hindu Kush, about Lieutenant Park learning to balance aggression with precision, about tours keeping aircraft flying with skill and dedication, about all the people who never made headlines but whose lives depended on pilots willing to fly low, slow, and dangerous. "Tell them this," Alina said. "Close air support matters because tactics evolve, technology changes, but the fundamental requirement never does. Somebody has to be willing to fly into the contested space between hope and disaster and tip the balance toward hope. That mission isn't glamorous. It doesn't generate headlines or viral videos, but it's the difference between coming home and not coming home, and that matters more than any strategic calculus." Webb grinned. "That's definitely going to make some generals uncomfortable." "Good. Comfortable generals make decisions that get people killed." The quote appeared in the Strategic Vision document, slightly sanitized but still recognizable. It also appeared on unofficial patches, in ready room walls, and in the kind of grassroots mythology that defines military culture. Hailstorm's Law, it was called. The mission isn't glamorous, but it matters more than any strategic calculus. Alina found herself invited to speak at the Air Force Academy, addressing cadets who were just beginning to understand what it meant to wear the uniform. She stood before 200 young people and told them the truth. "You're going to face moments when the right decision and the popular decision aren't the same thing. When following the rules means people die and breaking the rules means risking your career. Those moments will define you more than any medal or promotion. The question you have to answer is, did you join the Air Force to advance your career or to serve something larger than yourself? Because you can't always do both." One cadet raised her hand. "Captain Kessler, what happened when you were grounded? How did you handle being punished for doing the right thing?" Alina paused. The question cut deeper than the cadet probably realized. "I was angry. I felt betrayed by an institution I'd served faithfully. I questioned whether the sacrifice was worth it. And then 311 SEALs needed help, and I remembered why I became a pilot in the first place. Not for recognition or approval, but to fly the missions that need flying. The grounding was unjust, but it clarified my priorities." "Would you do it again, knowing the consequences?" "Every single time." The academy visit led to an invitation to speak at the Naval War College. which led to a symposium on joint operations, which led to Alina becoming an unofficial evangelist for the Close Air Support mission. She spoke plainly about the bureaucratic resistance she'd faced, the institutional bias toward high-speed, high-tech solutions, and the constant need to justify the existence of aircraft and tactics that actually saved lives. Some senior officers bristled at her candor. Others quietly approached her after presentations to share their own stories of fighting for unglamorous but essential missions. A pattern emerged. The people doing the actual fighting understood immediately what she was talking about. The people managing the fighting from headquarters needed convincing. 2 years into her instructor assignment, Alina was promoted to major. The ceremony was small, held on the flight line with her students and crew chiefs present. Webb pinned on her new rank and said something that stuck with her. Most officers get promoted for doing what they're told exceptionally well. You're getting promoted despite consistently doing what you thought was right instead of what was convenient. That's rare. Don't lose it as you move up. The promotion came with new responsibilities. Alina found herself on working groups developing future close air support doctrine, on panels evaluating new aircraft and weapon systems, in meetings where decisions about training and resource allocation were made. She discovered that fighting for the mission in briefing rooms was different from fighting for it in the air, but equally important. One particularly contentious meeting involved the future of the A-10 fleet. Budget pressures were mounting, and some Pentagon analysts argued that the aging Warthogs should be retired in favor of multi-role fighters that could perform close air support as a secondary mission. The F-35 can deliver precision munitions with greater survivability, one analyst argued. We don't need a single-mission aircraft in the modern battle space. Alina had been listening quietly, taking notes. Now she spoke. Can the F-35 loiter over a battlefield for 2 hours providing continuous close air support? Can it take a hit from a MANPAD and keep flying? Can it carry 1,100 rounds of 30mm ammunition for danger-close gun runs? Can it operate from austere forward airfields with minimal support equipment? Those are legacy requirements. Those are current requirements. Ask the special operations teams who call for close air support whether they want an aircraft designed to fight air superiority battles, occasionally supporting ground troops, or an aircraft designed specifically to support ground troops. Ask the 311 SEALs I pulled out of an ambush whether they cared about my aircraft's radar signature or its ability to kill what was trying to kill them. The analyst bristled. Major, you're arguing from anecdote rather than systemic analysis. No, I'm arguing from combat experience rather than PowerPoint slides. There's a difference. The meeting ended without resolution, but Alina's comments made their way up the chain of command. The A-10 debate continued, but the terms had shifted slightly. Combat effectiveness started weighing more heavily against theoretical survivability metrics. 3 years into her instructor assignment, Alina received orders that surprised her. She was being assigned to U.S. Special Operations Command as the Air Force liaison for close air support integration. The position was traditionally held by a lieutenant colonel, but someone in the Pentagon had decided her combat experience and advocacy work made her the right choice regardless of rank. The new assignment meant working directly with SEAL teams, Army Rangers, Special Forces groups, and the full spectrum of special operations units. It meant understanding their tactics, their mission profiles, their specific requirements for air support. It meant being the voice advocating for their needs in Air Force planning channels. The first few months were intensive. Alina embedded with different units, observing their training, learning their communication protocols, understanding the unique challenges of supporting operations that were often classified and always complex. The special operations community operated differently from conventional forces, more flexible, more adaptive, more willing to question doctrine if it didn't match reality. You get it, a SEAL team leader told her after watching her observe a training exercise. Most Air Force liaisons show up with a briefing about what they can provide. You're asking what we need and figuring out how to provide it. That's how close air support is supposed to work. In theory. In practice, we usually have to adapt our tactics to fit available air support rather than getting air support that fits our tactics. Alina made that her mission, ensuring air support adapted to ground tactical needs rather than forcing ground tactics to conform to air capabilities. It meant fighting bureaucratic battles over resource allocation, training priorities, and doctrinal flexibility. It meant being the person in Pentagon meetings who said, "That won't work in actual combat," when everyone else was nodding along. It also meant flying. The position came with authorization to maintain proficiency in multiple aircraft types, and Alina spent every available hour in the cockpit. She flew A-10s, AC-130 gunships, even got qualified in helicopter operations to better understand the insertion and extraction missions that so often required close air support. One night flight in an AC-130 over a training range crystallized something she'd been thinking about for years. The gunship was orbiting a target area, its sensors painting a god's-eye view of the battlefield below. The crew pilots, navigator, fire control officer, sensor operators worked with seamless coordination, identifying threats, engaging targets, adjusting tactics in real time. "This is what close air support really is," the aircraft commander said. "Not just about weapons or aircraft performance. It's about crew coordination, situational awareness, communication with ground forces. It's about understanding the battle well enough to make split-second decisions that save lives." Alina watched the crew work and understood why she'd fought so hard for this mission. It wasn't about preserving aircraft or justifying budgets. It was about preserving the expertise, the institutional knowledge, the cultural understanding that made this level of effectiveness possible. That knowledge couldn't be maintained if the mission was treated as an afterthought, assigned to aircraft designed for other purposes, or performed by pilots who didn't specialize in it. After 4 years as the SOCOM liaison, Alina was promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned as the commander of an A-10 squadron. Coming back to lead a flying unit felt like coming home. The squadron, the 347th Fighter Squadron known as the Warthogs, had a proud history but had been struggling with retention and morale. Budget cuts, aging aircraft, and constant rumors about retirement of the platform had taken their toll. Alina's first squadron meeting was direct. "I'm not going to tell you the A-10 will fly forever. I'm not going to promise that Congress will fund everything we need. What I will tell you is that as long as we're flying this mission, we're going to fly it better than anyone else. We're going to prove that experience and expertise matter, that the close air support mission saves lives, that this squadron is essential." The pilots and crew chiefs responded to her authenticity. She flew with them, maintained currency in the most demanding tactical scenarios, and fought for them in resource allocation battles. She insisted on realistic training that challenged comfort zones. She celebrated their successes and took responsibility for failures. 6 months into her command, the squadron deployed to support combat operations in a classified location. The deployment lasted 9 months, some of the most intensive combat flying Alina had experienced. The missions were varied, supporting special operations raids, providing overwatch for convoy movements, conducting reconnaissance in contested areas, and executing close air support for troops in contact. The squadron flew over 1,500 combat sorties without a single friendly fire incident or mission failure. They earned a reputation for responsiveness and precision. When ground commanders needed close air support, they requested the Warthog specifically. The squadron's call sign Hog became synonymous with reliable salvation. During that deployment, Alina flew a mission that would later be used as a case study at the weapons school. A Marine reconnaissance unit had been compromised deep in enemy territory. They were 12 hours from any possible ground rescue, low on ammunition, and surrounded by enemy forces that had them pinned in a small cluster of buildings. The weather was marginal low clouds, limited visibility, terrain that made navigation challenging. Most air support had been diverted to other missions or deemed unable to operate in the conditions. Alina launched with her wingman, Lieutenant Colonel Park, the same officer she'd trained years earlier, and navigated to the target area using a combination of GPS, terrain following, and tactical intuition. They found the Marines by following the tracer fire and explosions. The situation was desperate. Enemies closing from 3 directions, the Marines' defensive perimeter collapsing.